We're live. Kind of. So my name is James Cool. I'm the owner of BetterDFS.com, and I was going to be doing a solo slate shot. I was going to do a solo shot Slate Talk, talk about Week 16 by myself, but Eric Haber, SheetsPwn, reached out to me and said, "Hey, happy to jump on with you." So he's going to be jumping on here in a minute. And in the meantime, like I said, I don't know if anybody actually took me seriously here, but I have been trying to figure out a Rubik's Cube for the last, 24 hours or so. And man, these things are fun. The thing about a Rubik's Cube is that it is basically all algorithms after you get past the first step. So there's like 7 steps here, right? First layer edges, first layer corners, second layer yellow cross, swap the yellow edges, position the yellow corners, and then orient the last layer corners. And the thing is, I can get through to about step 6, right? So I just finished the first 3 steps on this one. I got the white finished. I've got the bottom layers done, as you can see here. But once we get past getting the yellow cross set up, then there's actually a 1 in 12 chance that you have an unsolvable scramble anyway. So then you might have to restart, which is kind of a bitch, right? I've had to restart twice, but I will say I'm getting better at the algorithms. So that's pretty cool. I am going to guarantee that nobody actually gives a shit about that whatsoever. But that is what has been taking up my life for the last 24 hours or so. Outside of that, getting ready for Christmas break. There's no break when you're in the DFS industry. Even the All-Star break for NBA is still like MLB prep. But we get Christmas break here pretty soon. It's going to be pretty nice. I hope that people mostly listened and did not play this 2-gamer today. I just thought that it was a shitty 2-gamer. Like, you basically came down to, okay, the game environment that you like have to slam into is this Baltimore-Pittsburgh game. And if you were doing that, then you were likely just going to be duped heavily. And if you didn't want to be duped, you had to build in really weird ways, like playing a Michael Pruitt or something like that. Playing Isaiah Likely was probably, a pretty solid play on the slate. But overall, I just thought that the game environments involved and the way that it was set up, I just thought that it was a shitty 2-gamer. So I ended up not playing it. Instead, I have been trying to solve Rubik's Cubes. So like I said, Sheets is going to join me here in a second, but I have the models all set up and we can talk a little bit about what they're saying. I guess I'll go run a contest sim here really quick. Let's do medium and average. Yeah, so this is the thing. I'm not actually doing the Rubik's Cubes because I think that it will keep me sharp. Even though that is kind of a cool thing about doing a Rubik's Cube. So I got this for my son, who is not quite 4 years old. And when you get a Rubik's Cube, it comes put together, right? So my son has an understanding of the default Rubik's Cube being of it working when it's done. And today he picked up a Rubik's Cube that he had fucked up yesterday. And with tears in his eyes said, "Dad, can you fix it? Can you make it work?" So that crushed my soul and was enough fuel in the fire for me to ignore a lot of different things in my life and try to figure out how to fucking solve Rubik's Cubes. Because when you're not quite 4-year-old son says with tears in his eyes right before Christmas, "Dad, can you fix my new toy?" You're gonna do it, man. So that's actually why I've been on Rubik's Cubes. But it is a nice little side effect that is keeping me sharp. Let's see. I'm also going to run the top 5 owned. We'll do 500 acceptable range. I'm just setting up models right now. I don't know if anybody has ever gone through this process, but this is usually how I do things. I'll pull up the range of outcomes first. And then I'll also have a pivot finder and I'll run the top 5, sometimes top 10 ownership pivots if I think there's 10 players that are necessary. And then I'll also go run a medium average field over in the contest sims. And this is just kind of how I set things up. when I'm thinking through like how to actually look at a slate and break a slate down. Because I haven't really looked at this yet. I have written one article, but I haven't actually broken down anything yet. What's up?
Yo, what's going on?
How you doing, dude? You saved me from a solo show.
I'm just probably on the last day and a half of COVID. So
Oh man.
yeah, I'll survive. Just a little annoying. Hopefully I don't get the short COVID, which would compel me to play too much Michael Penix, but we'll see about that.
Well, I don't know if playing too much Michael Penix is worse than long COVID, where you lose your fucking sense of smell. I actually had that. Do you know that?
Oh,
I had long COVID. I lost 90% of my sense of smell for 2 years.
Oh my God.
It just recently started coming back. I have like half my sense of smell back now.
Oh.
Crazy shit. Anyway, I think the Michael Penix at 18% owned is a fucking atrocious play, but I mean, we'll break that down a little bit. Sheets, have you done any like prep for this slate yet? Have you looked at anything?
No, you're catching me at the perfect time. I literally just updated my projections and did my first build since like Monday. So I'm literally just looking for the first time to see what I would get and hoping that I would not get too much Michael Penix, in which case I'd probably have to just manually cut it short.
I am posting the stream in the Discord. Really quick, while we are in kind of a lull before we actually get down to this, Pater did just start a new. I have up Rubik's Cube instructions. I don't think you saw in the Discord, but the last 24 hours of my life have been dedicated to trying to figure out a Rubik's Cube. If you did not see the announcement, Pater is now part of the Tails Marketplace. We have a whole bunch of stuff that we put up. I think we put up 16 lines today before I actually had to leave the house. Tribe and Jason are going to be doing more, but if you would like to go follow the Pater group over at Tails, I think Tails is awesome. You can see my announcements for it in the Discord and over on Twitter. Really cool platform. I'll give a little bit more information on that later, but let's go ahead and start breaking down. So you said your first run. What was your first run? What did you get on your first run?
Yeah, so unfortunately, right now I'm getting just an overwhelming amount of Jahmyr Gibbs.
Yeah.
And also more guys like over 50%. This is pre-sim. This is just kind of like running stuff, and prioritizing upside to some degree. I'm getting this Brian Thomas, Jacoby Myers thing. Both of them coming from that same game. And also Brendan Strange. So that's going to be interesting. And I was looking at that earlier in the week, and I thought it'd be kind of a good kind of off the board play, but maybe it's just not going to be particularly off the board if I'm getting to it so quickly. But that's the first thing I'm looking at is that. Then I'm getting stuff like James Conner from the Arizona game, obviously, and I am getting the Penix. But I don't know. Talk to me about this. And when's the last time a guy made his first start and really did anything? I don't know. Talk to me about this play.
It's hard, man. I think that Penix makes sense, and I will be calling him Michael Penis. I will not be calling him Michael Penix because I think that it's way funnier to call him Michael Penis. So Michael Penis Jr. Projected to be 18% owned, min price QB up against the Giants. So there's some smoke coming from a fire within Atlanta that has basically said that Michael Penix is not ready for this start. They have said that he has barely thrown to the starting wide receivers at all, that he doesn't completely have down the playbook, that they're basically just saying, we hope that he's a little bit better than Kirk Cousins so that we can try to make the playoffs, but they didn't want to start him this year. And 18% owned for a cheap QB that we have no idea what his upside is. That sounds like about the worst play that you could possibly make. The contest sims do not mind him. They have him as a 15% exposure play. He shows up in 15% of the winning lineups. That is mostly due to price and ownership. I want to remind everybody that when we're talking about the contest sims here at Pater, it is building out the plausibility of lineups within a field. So higher owned players are more likely to have exposure in winning lineups than lower owned players, simply because we expect higher owned players to be in the lineups that are used. So Michael Penix Jr. at 18% projected ownership and 15% exposure in winning lineups. That still grades him out as a negative play. I don't think that he is a terrible play at negative 3%, but you have Anthony Richardson right there at 5,400, who the models like considerably more, 26% exposure in winning lineups in a medium field. I ran this on average sharpness. 10% edge. He projects as the second chalkiest quarterback. It just looks like people are trying to pay down at quarterback for the most part. Anthony Richardson, Michael Penix Jr., Caleb Williams has 8% ownership. People are still playing Kyler Murray for whatever goddamn reason. 9% projected ownership for Kyler Murray. So I think that if Michael Penix Jr. is really going to be pushing 20% ownership, I don't know how you play him. It'll put you in a position where, yeah, you kind of have your pick of the litter of ways to get different with him. But at 4,500, with no idea the range of outcomes, with many sources saying that he is not ready to start, and in a spot where there's no reason why Atlanta doesn't just run the ball 37 times with Tyler Algier and Bijan Robinson and have Penix only drop back 20 times. Like, if they have a lead, I don't think that they have him pass at all. So if his volume is low and we don't know what his range of outcomes is, I'm just not sure how I play him at high ownership. If he was 8% owned, that's one thing. If he's 20% owned, I can't justify it.
Well, again, when we say we're going to play him, right? I mean, him includes other guys, right? So
sure.
So again, we when we went over your models and the way you use your tools, you always started with, before going to players, just starting with stacks and like stack combinations and stuff like that. So I imagine that if you were going to play the Penix combinations, I mean, you'd have good guys to choose from, you know, because you know where it's coming from. I mean, you're between Mooney and I guess and Pitts and the other name excludes me for a second, Drake London, not to mention Bijan Robinson. I guess that's why it's gonna be somewhat popular, because people would probably play those guys anyway, without Penix, and because he's only 4,500, that's why he's going to get in there. But I don't know. Now, here's something interesting. I just actually ran my sims for the first time, and I always love to see like the delta between what I get pre-simming and what I get after. And we talk about this with different sports, like basketball. The difference is like very small. Where hockey and baseball, it's almost like you can't even pronounce the names of the people the same way as if you run it without the sims. But simming in football right now, I'm still getting Jahmyr Gibbs as the highest owned, but it's not as much. Like I'd be getting like 42% when I adjust it for other stuff. And let me tell you what group really, really rises to the top of my exposures when I apply the sims. I'm getting a bunch of the Bears. The Bears, all of them, like the whole stack, like Caleb Williams, DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, like all three of those guys just really, really stand out. Now, again, it's garbage in, garbage out. It depends on what type of ownership, you know, and what kind of a field you kind of put in here. But based on what I'm getting, I kind of like that. I like when you get a big difference between when you're just running optimals and running, you know, upside stuff versus the sims. Did you? I mean, listen, it's a dome game. You got a good game script for the Bears, you know, allegedly. Do you get to any of that at all? Do you like that at all?
Yeah, I do. I mean, as far as value goes, so if I'm looking just straight up at value in 4x, right?
Okay.
Miami is the top overall, followed by San Francisco. San Francisco makes sense. And then we have a Jacksonville stack, to your point, on Brian Thomas and Bretton Strange. And then we have Chicago. And I think Chicago makes a lot of sense. Similarly to the reason why I was like, why are we not just stacking Detroit and Buffalo last week? Why wouldn't we just be looking at Detroit and Chicago again? Like, Detroit has 1 million people on their defense on IR. They're playing practice squad guys at certain positions. They don't have any depth. And the thing that has been killing Caleb Williams has been that he has just been pressured every single play and been getting obliterated every single play. If there's not that much pressure on him, and there's kind of this ability to pick apart this defense, I think that they're a fine play. And you know, Keenan Allen, he had that streak of 3 games where he was 20 plus fantasy points when they were passing plenty. If Detroit is able to score, which they should be able to score. It's not like their offense is ailing. I don't see any reason why Chicago can't keep up. And the cool thing about going with that, Jahmyr Gibbs is going to be 40 to 50% owned or something like that.
Sure.
Right. He's going to be high owned. But I don't think that very many people are going to be playing across from him Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, or Cole Kmet or Roman or Adunze, right? So if I sort by ownership, it looks like DJ Moore is getting some ownership, but 14% owned is not that high. Keenan Allen, I mean,
this is all higher than I thought they'd be, huh?
Well, where do you have Keenan Allen?
Yeah, I have DJ Moore at like 16% and Keenan Allen at 11. I thought I was coming up with something so off the board with these guys. I was hoping they'd be under 10, but
but think about it. Like if all these people are wanting to play Michael Penix Jr., I don't think people are just going to play him naked. I think that we're going to see some
Right.
boosted ownership with Drake London and Mooney and like these guys. And I think it'll likely come at the expense of the other cheap stacks, Chicago, Jacksonville.
You could be right.
And Indianapolis. So I do think that we're likely going to see reduced ownership on the Chicago stack. And even if these guys are 10% owned, so what? 10% isn't when you jump, right? Like you're more worried about like the 15 to 20% range that might steam up into the 25% range, but ownership at wide receiver is really, really spread out this week. I don't think that you lose out on anything by going with the Chicago stack, especially because I think Caleb Williams is probably only going to be 7 and 10% owned. Like I think that's a totally fine quality stack. I think that's good.
Now I see at the top of your list the Jamar Chase stuff. These guys these Bengal games just go crazy every single day, and it's kind of a shame that they benched Jameson Winston because this game was going to be a complete what do they say in League of Legends, a total like clown fiesta,
Yeah, a fiesta. Yeah,
it would be a total freaking fiesta. You have two teams that, well, maybe since the Cincinnati's still mathematically in, I guess so. So I was going to say, typically you have two teams that don't give an F, and you have guys just love to sling the ball over the field. I don't know if DTR can have the team keep up to turn it into that, really. But I mean, these guys, every time the ball doesn't go to Chase to one Chase, it goes to the other one, right? Yeah. It's either Jamar Chase or Chase Brown, and then there's T. Higgins who's low enough owned, right? So it's just such an easy freaking stack to play. I worry, as usual, that it's going to be too chalky because, again, if I see it so quickly, everybody is. I mean, I'm seeing those guys like Chase Brown. I have him like 22, for example, and Jamar Chase, I have him like 23%. You know, it seems awkward to play like wide receivers that chalky. Then you have T. Higgins, no real bargain either. I have him at 16. I don't know where you have him, but you don't get any breaks playing Cincinnati here, and I don't know. I was hoping to not get as much of that, but like right now, even after simming, it's like Bears, Bengals. And then you know what? The next one I have are these Seattle guys. I have the Seattle guys next. So it's looking like I'm not winning the Millie Maker this week. You know what I mean? It's looking like the things I'm playing are not going to be particularly earth shattering, I think.
Right. Really quick, I want to answer this. We're back on Chuba train again. I mean, at lower ownership, I'm fine with it. The problem with the Chuba play was that he was projected to be like 35% owned, and I'm not eating a Panthers player at 35% owned. I just think that's very silly, especially when there were plenty of pivots. This week, Chuba's projecting for about 13% ownership against Arizona. He's 6,800, which is palpable. Like, that's not terrible. There's still a lot of pivots around him, but like you're not getting killed by paying for his ownership in this instance, and so you're in a better spot there. Cincinnati projects for 6 points higher than any other stack that I have on this slate.
It's a lot.
That's a fucking lot. I mean, their top finish percentile is 17%. The next highest is Miami at 7.3%. So that's hard to get away from. I don't think that their ownership is going to be high enough to say that I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
especially because I think that Burrow is not going to. It's not like Burrow is going to be like 15 to 20% owned like some of these cheap guys. I think Burrow is probably going to come in similarly to Caleb Williams and Jared Goff, somewhere in this 5 to 7 to 10% range, which I'm fine with. But to your point, it does feel like a week where everything that is good has some amount of ownership to think through, and nothing is like, oh, I'm going to get this at like no percent ownership. If I sort by 4x rate, I think that the stack that looks the best when I sort by 4x rate is probably Miami. Because Miami is likely not going to have barely any ownership. You can get, so here's a stack for you that I'm surprised you're not getting. Tua plus Tyreek Hill plus Jonnu Smith has the second highest median for me, 50.71. And has a sum ownership of 14%. Basically nothing. Miami stacks are really, really good from an ownership perspective this week.
When I looked at this game on Monday, even I was going through this with Bobby, and I was mystified by how low the total was, like in the game, and with all the different skill guys on both sides of the ball, I think it was like 43 or some ridiculous number. I forgot what it was, but it would seem as though it should have been 50. You know what I mean? Like that's what I would have imagined. And the whole thing, and then Bobby even said to me, well, all I know for sure is I'm betting the over. And I've been around the block. You know what I mean? Like I've been around the block a long time. And the whole thing just kind of stinks to me. Like I just feel as though you see something like that, you just probably got to be a reason. And next thing I'll do is I'll end up playing all these guys, and then you'll see the San Francisco, establish the run machine. Just start pounding it, and then Mike McDaniel starts to pound the rock, and next thing you know, it's freaking 10-7 at half, and I'm like, what am I doing here? But I wish I was getting more of it, if you want to know the truth, because it seems like you'd want to do it. You have Tyreek Hill is under 7K, right? I mean, is that true?
Yeah, he's 6,900.
He hasn't been under 7K. He hasn't been under 7K since the freaking Eisenhower administration. How are you gonna? I mean, but I don't know. I'm just personally not getting to them. I'll probably just get all tilted in the 1 o'clock game from the 1 o'clock games, and I'll just ending up playing them all in the 4 o'clock slate or something like that.
I told myself that I wasn't going to play anymore the rest of the NFL season.
Yeah.
I usually cut off the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
But if I'm going to get a $6,900 Tyreek Hill at 5% ownership,
you'll come out of retirement. That's right.
And I get a Miami San Francisco game that has a condensed target share with multiple people out on both sides. Running backs hurt for San Francisco, so they're down to a practice squad guy they don't trust. And both teams kind of playing with playoff hopes still intact. Like, I don't know why everybody is just ignoring this one. I think that it's because Tyreek Hill has burned people, I guess, for a majority of the year, and they're just tired of it. But I mean, $6,900 for a guy without Jalen Waddle there, and Jonnu Smith is at a priority position. Tua is going to be able to get there through QB plus twos, bring it back with Juwan Jennings, and you can even do, if you wanted to overstack this, I know that you're an overstack guy, you can play George Kittle in the flex. That's sick too. I mean, I think that is a really, really good spot. And if I was going to be, I might play one in the Millie Maker. I'm not going to play any like actual volume, but if I play anything, it's probably going to be a Miami San Francisco stack. It's just too low owned, and all of the upside metrics say that it's a good spot. The medians say that it's a good spot. The ownership is low. The condensed. I don't know how people aren't on it.
So one of the things that I want to address when someone said you guys like Chuba Hubbard and all this stuff, and the answer is sure, but these guys are going to be really, really high owned, and there isn't that much that looks great that's not high owned. So what I like to do is, and I hear you talk about this sometimes also, is just, okay, so how do you get leverage from those guys without really being too crazy, right? So the way I look at it is with leverage is you can either, let's take Gibbs, for example. Like, let's just say you wanted to pivot off him or fade him. I mean, two ways, in my opinion, you do that. One is you play guys near the same price at the same position, which is kind of like what the pivot finder will do. Or what you do is just play the same macro without him in it. So you'll just play Detroit with the receivers and not play the running backs. And you can certainly do that. And the other one I want to talk about is, since he mentioned Chuba Hubbard, like earlier this week, when I make my first like lineup, like without watching any content, doing any projections or anything like that, I'm like, you know what fits well? I'll play Bryce Young, and I put Chuba Hubbard in. I'm like, you know what? But let me just throw all these other guys in. Let me throw in Thielen, David Moore, Coker, and then I'm looking at it. I'm like, whoa, these guys are all really cheap. And I just kind of, for a joke, kind of like threw all those guys in. And then I was watching some other content throughout the week, and someone was saying that Coker was going to be like 40% owned or something like that. And they're going to be really, really good values. And throughout the course of the week, they just kind of all disappeared. So I would say, though, that if you're thinking of playing Hubbard and you're just kind of scared of that ownership, maybe that's not the worst idea in the world. Now, I happen to not be getting to them. Okay. I'm getting, Thielen, maybe, market weight, which is not much. What 12% for Thielen? But that Coker play just kind of seemed to have dropped off the face of the earth for me. You know what I mean? I don't know what happened to the projection on him or the David Moore experience, which we talked about, a few weeks ago. But I don't know, like if you didn't want to play Hubbard, but you thought you could do some business in Arizona, take a shot and play those other receivers.
So what you end up on, and I do that all the time. When I build out and play regular volume, I play 3 to 5 lineups. I'm always looking. I'll build one lineup and say, okay, I have Jahmyr Gibbs in this one, so the next lineup that I build is going to be a Detroit Lions stack without Jahmyr Gibbs. Because I like the game environment, and I also want to be able to hedge my bets a little bit and say, okay, if this game goes off and I have Jahmyr Gibbs, that's great. Now I'm depending on a stack from another spot to bring me relative value. And then if this game goes off and I have Jahmyr Gibbs or I don't have Jahmyr Gibbs and it's a passing game, then great. I have direct leverage against 32% of the field by taking a different running back kind of in the same range, or not in the same range, right? You can play cheaper ones too. But those direct and indirect leverages, I think, are really, really important, especially when you're playing multiple lineups. Like you, Sheets, you play a portfolio. Like you have to have stances that cover different bases.
Yeah.
You're not trying to cover every base.
No.
Well, actually, so when people say that, people are like, oh, you can't cover every base. You have to designate what bases you are playing. Like the bases that you cover, you should cover every base in relation to the bases that you are trying to play. So if you have, interest in 5 different stacks, I think that it makes sense to then also have some portion of your portfolio be the running backs from those teams, just in case that game does end up going off, but it's all to the running backs. And then, you end up having a bit of a hedge on those stacks, and vice versa. If your pool of running backs is 6 or 7 or whatever, I think you should have a portion of your portfolio that is those stacks, similar to the Chuba Hubbard and Panthers thing, where you end up saying, okay, well, Chuba Hubbard, he didn't get there because it was all the passing game, but I have these 4 or 5, this handful of stacks over here that are Bryce Young with Coker, with Adam Thielen, that ended up getting me really, really good value. I think that it's important to do those things. The hard part when you have a single lineup, and there are a lot of people who just put together a single lineup, is kind of sorting through and figuring out where that most important piece of leverage comes. And I think that in instances like that, we have Jahmyr Gibbs, who's likely going to be 40% owned. That's the key leverage point on the slate, is what you're doing with Jahmyr Gibbs. If you play Jahmyr Gibbs, I think it's really important to do something like play it in a unique way, like an overstack against a Chicago stack. I think you could do something like Gibbs plus Jameson Williams, and then bring it back with Caleb Williams, DJ Moore, and Keenan Allen, and do a 5-man in that game environment, while also still having Jahmyr Gibbs, but doing it in a way where if the game goes completely off the rails, you get all of the fantasy points from it in a unique way. Or you can do Jahmyr Gibbs and have like a low-owned stack, like a Panther stack, right? Panther stack's going to be like 9% aggregate owned or something, or Miami stack, which for some fucking reason is going to be 15% aggregate owned. And get a low owned stack around it, and then kind of fill in the rest of it with lower volatility, higher owned plays. That's kind of the way that I think about it.
What's kind of cool. People, and I used to say this too, that must be nice to be able to play like a whole bunch of lineups so that you could just get all kinds of coverage. But when you do that, you put a lot of pressure on yourself, because if I'm playing one lineup, if you played one lineup, you could be confident in playing it, because that there's, if you're only playing one lineup, you're not getting every combination. Like you're like you said, you're making a couple of decisions in one lineup, and you realize that you're playing one lineup, and it is what it is. Once you start getting into playing these 150s and like 200s, whatever, then you start thinking, oh my God, if I can't get with everything that I need, and I'm playing 200 freaking lineups, I'm going to kill myself. Where if you play the one lineup, it's no big deal, because it's just one lineup. I don't expect to be able to cover everything. So it's funny, if I were going to play one lineup, I wonder if I would have it in me to go for that max leverage, or would I just be way too chalky?
The answer would be what contest are you playing?
Yeah, I guess so. Well, if I'm only playing one lineup, right, I'd probably want to play it. I couldn't play it in everything, because that violates a million different.
Right. Yeah. So if you only have one lineup and you're playing in one contest, in the Millie Maker, you go for max leverage. You go for a Detroit stack and bring it back with some Chicago players, overstack it, hope that it just goes to the fucking moon, and then Jahmyr Gibbs isn't involved. If you have it in the 333, the Wildcat, I'm playing, which I would do. I would play Jahmyr Gibbs with likely a Chicago stack on the other side, or a Miami stack. And then if I had a Miami stack with Jahmyr Gibbs, I would just be like, give me the rest of the chalk. Give me Chase Brown, or give me James Conner, give me, Malik Neighbors. Like, give me as much of the chalk around that as I possibly can have, because I want to lower the volatility. If Miami goes off, if I'm in the Wildcat, if Miami goes off at 10% total ownership and Tyreek Hill drops 35 points at 5% ownership, I don't fucking need any more relative value. I'm going to beat the field if the rest of the things just go according to plan. So I don't need any more. But in the Millie Maker, I probably need more. Like, I probably still need another guy who's going to nuke at 5% owned. So I still want to try to find something else that's lower owned. It's all about the contest that you play.
I saw in your stack ratings, I think the second one listed had Malik Neighbors in it. That was I don't know if it was just meant as a run back, or I just saw his name somewhere in your list. I don't know. I guess that was, and I was thinking of this, when I first again looked at the slate, and Bobby was telling me, oh, everybody's going to play, Penix, and I'm like, I don't know. I mean, like, for me, I kind of want to play the Giants defense and Tyrone Tracy and right? Who's Tyrone Tracy? You want somebody low owned? Try that on for size,
Yeah.
Tyrone Tracy and Malik Neighbors, and he's like, well, what about, you're going to play whoever the quarterback is? I'm like, I don't know, maybe not. But again, you want leverage against Atlanta, you go play that baloney. Malik Neighbors, again, I mean, like, he said nobody throwing to him. He still gets 10 targets a game, right? Do you have him projected at high ownership?
Yeah, 17 or 14%.
Crap. Yeah. That's what I'm telling you. I can't. That's why I need the Sims sometimes, because everything I come up with, I'm like, oh, this sounds like such a great play. Yeah, good job, Sheets. So does everybody else. It's like,
it's great job, you fucking chalk monster.
Something like that.
Malik Neighbors, I mean, he makes sense at 6,100. He's another one of those guys that's just going to get massive volume. Jacoby Myers is at 5,800, but all these guys are high owned. Right. So if I sort by 4x rate, the guy who I have the most interest in at lower ownership is going to be Jackson Smith-Njigba.
Okay.
Projected at 10% ownership. I'm fine with that. But 6K looks great. It's in a really, really good matchup. Minnesota gives up the most wide receiver fantasy points above expectation. And at 6K, I think he makes for a really, really good play. I also think that DK Metcalf at no ownership is probably a really good play. I absolutely understand why you're getting on Seattle stacks, because that matchup against Minnesota, if you go Geno Smith, Jackson Smith-Njigba, and DK Metcalf and bring it back to Justin Jefferson, that's a completely off the radar stack. Completely off the radar. You can play anybody who you want with that. You can play that in conjunction with Jahmyr Gibbs and Malik Neighbors. Like, you can play that with, Chuba Hubbard. You can do anything you want with that. That's going to be completely off the radar. And I think that it makes a lot of sense too.
Find it amazing how Pittsburgh always seems to play freaking Baltimore tough. It's just amazing. Just amazing. And Baltimore comes out flat. just when everybody's projecting a game script where they're just going to roll over them. Yeah, I hope you're right about Jackson Smith and Jigba. I have him closer to 15% owned. I'm trying to find like anybody that's showing up as like lower owned that I'm even getting to. So yeah, here we go. Like Coker, David Moore. Oh, here you go. I found a Miami guy, Malik Washington.
Yeah. Yep.
I'm getting some of that, but I like your I like the Jonnu Smith. It's he seems to get there all the time. Here's one. If you're going to play the Cincinnati chalk, if you don't feel like doing that, you could play Eusebius.
No, you could not play Eusebius.
You can't do that, huh?
No, dude, I'll play Malik Washington. Damn. He's 3,700. If I'm gonna play value wide receiver, I'm probably gonna play Malik Washington.
Okay, all right.
Here's a fucked up stack. How about you do a Miami stack without Tyreek Hill?
Sure, why not? So
how about you do Tua plus Malik Washington 3,700 plus Jonnu Smith at 5,500, and then you just have unlimited money to do with the rest of your stack. How about that?
That seems like good for 4 p.m. slate. 4 p.m. slate, and you also play. You can also play Waddle. You play all three receivers except for Tyreek Hill, and this way when he pulls up on the sideline like he does like every game and threatens to be out of the game, then you go, ooh, maybe this time we'll be out for the rest of the
game. Yeah, I think Miami stacks are super interesting. I ran the Pivot Finder on just top 5 owned, and there are no fucking pivots basically at all.
Rough out there.
You can't really pivot off of Chase Brown. Devon Kane at lower ownership makes sense as a pivot off of Chase Brown and James Conner. He's the main pivot that I'm seeing.
What price? What prices are these guys?
These guys are in the $7,200 to $7,700 range.
So what about Kyren Williams?
Kyren Williams does not show up. He's not projected well enough.
Okay.
But a Kane, or however the fuck you pronounce his name, he looks like a pretty decent pivot, 7,400. Bijan Robinson looks like a pretty okay pivot. But the thing is, so that goes back to what we were talking about with, Jahmyr Gibbs and the Detroit spot, is everybody's playing Jahmyr Gibbs, so you should play the Detroit stack. Everybody is wanting to play Michael Penix Jr., but I haven't seen that much steam on Drake London or Darnell Mooney. So it almost feels like people are going to try to play him naked, which I think is just the most dumb shit thing that you can possibly do in large field GPPs. But I digress.
Don't digress for too much. You're not digressing, because that was really the next thing I was going to ask you is do you have any, not set things, but for this particular slate, any recommendations of what types of stack combination you recommend? Because again, like you said before, I don't like to play naked quarterbacks. I don't like to play QB plus ones even. I like to play QB plus twos if I can get away with it. And then when I first ran these builds, I was wondering, how much of the Penix I'd be getting by himself, and I'm actually getting zero non-correlated stacks in my builds here. What I'm probably going to do on a week like this, I might do what I always do and just eliminate the QB plus ones, and just go for QB plus twos. The very least, I'll make sure to have QB plus one with a run back. But as we talked about before, I'm still not even convinced that you even need one. I'm really not. I mean, no, I don't really think the work's been done yet. I think that the Sims have just kind of proven, or haven't proven anything, but they're attempting to show that maybe it's not as important. Listen, the run backs and game script and that definitely satisfies the human element of this, where we love as human beings to tell stories about how games are going to go. Like, boy, I'm not going to play Amon St. Brown unless Chicago keeps it close, or so I better play someone from Chicago. Otherwise, I'm not playing Amon St. Brown. It sounds right. It sounds instinctive. It's like when people say, well, I'm going to play, if I'm playing a running back, I'm going to play the defense because, why am I doing that exactly? Well, number one, somebody told me to once. And number two, because, well, I guess it makes sense, right? Because if the team is doing well, then they're probably winning, which means that the other team didn't score much, which means that now I'm going to run the ball, and it seems right, but I don't know exactly how much that it really matters. Let's just put it that way. And I bring that up to ask you, if you're playing all this Gibbs, or if you play like if you use an optimizer which is too stupid or too smart, however you want to put it, you'll end up getting like all this Detroit like defense. Not because Detroit itself projects all that great, but because it's being correlated with Gibbs. And I always say that a lot when I get like these pairings. I say to myself, self, am I getting all this defense because I'm getting all this running back? Or sometimes you get this chalk defense and I end up as a result getting all this running back from the same team. Are you gonna? I mean, do you? I don't know. Do you like Detroit defense? Do you give a shit about correlation of that type of that type?
Yeah. So here's the thing with bringbacks.
Okay.
Bringbacks, I think, are a good idea if it's on a team that is good. That's really what it comes down to. So, like, it's the same thing in NBA. People don't correlate enough in NBA because they think that there are no correlations, but that's not really the point. The point of correlating in NBA is trying to capture a game that is competitive and could have a chance of going into overtime. That's the point of correlating in NBA. The other point of correlating in NBA is also say that you have Giannis on one side and then you have some shit can team on the other side. If Giannis is really going to reach his ceiling, then it's very likely the other team was competitive enough for him to play his entire fourth quarter rotation. So you probably want some of the cheap piece of shit players on a shit can team to correlate with Giannis so that he can find his ceiling. That's the idea behind bring back and game environment correlations, right? So in NFL, what we end up doing, people say, oh, well, you want to bring back, but they don't think about it the right way. They say that they want to bring back because if one team scores a bunch of points, the other team is more likely to pass to try to catch up in the fourth quarter for garbage time or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. But that ignores the point that if you have a bring back from a team that fucking sucks, it's hard for them to develop fantasy points even in a scenario where they're in garbage time. Right. Garbage time for a team like Tennessee doesn't actually fucking matter because Will Levis is really, really fucking bad. So it doesn't matter if he's passing a bunch, if the passes are inaccurate and he's ineffective. But if a team like Detroit, as an extreme example, is in comeback mode, they're very efficient, very effective, and they are likely to produce points in garbage time because they have a higher volume of passing attempts, right? So when you think about correlations and when you think about the way that you have to actually build that kind of stuff out, what you're actually thinking about is the team, if they are in a garbage time scenario, going to be able to produce these fantasy points that I am looking for as the bring back? So in a situation like Detroit and Chicago, yes, I would like to have a bring back from Chicago because I think that their players are good enough to be able to translate extra volume in garbage time into fantasy points. I don't feel as inclined to do that with a team like the Giants or a team like the Titans or even a team like the Jaguars, right? Like, do I really trust Mac Jones to be able to be effective trying to pass in garbage time? I'm not sure. It all depends. So when we think about game environment and correlation and stuff like that, that's what you think about. You think about the strength of both teams. That's why that Detroit Buffalo game last week was the stone nuts to focus on, because if either team got from behind, like they have the effectiveness to actually turn garbage time into real fantasy point upside. This week, I'm not so sure about any of that for any of these teams, mostly because when I look at, so I was running some NBA stuff, so I had pulled out my screen. But when I look at the team totals, we have Cincinnati at 27.5. They're big favorites. Detroit at 27.5. Up against Chicago, who is relatively low favorites, right? Arizona up against Seattle. Both of those teams, I think that if they're playing from behind, have a decent chance of turning garbage time into actual fantasy points. Atlanta versus the Giants, like people are going to be forcing in Malik Neighbors for those fantasy points, right? But I don't really look at any of these spots and think to myself that I have to have any of these teams in a garbage time scenario. So I'm less inclined to feel like I need to jam in bringbacks on this slate. Now, to your point of QB +1 or QB +2, that also comes back to upside and how many points I think team scores. A team like Cincinnati with a team total 27.275, I'm happy to QB +2 that. Joe Burrow doesn't run much. I think that if they reach their team total, if they do it through the air, then Joe Burrow gets there and he can carry multiple wide receivers along with him. But a team, if we scroll down here a little bit, a team like Carolina at 21 or Jacksonville at 20.75, like maybe I just want to use one wide receiver from those situations.
You know what the bottom line is, again, talking through this, and especially in light of this last conversation, I think I just have the answer and to what you're supposed to play this week. And one of it, and we both touched on it, and I think the Bears game, okay. But the only thing I want to ask you about that is there bad weather in that game or no?
I don't think so. Okay. I mean, I don't pay much attention to weather one way or another.
Well, if it is projected for 30-degree winds, even though the median projection is going to factor that in to some degree, I mean, certainly caps upside a little bit. So I would try that game, and the other one is the one that you mentioned that I am not getting to right now, and that's that freaking Miami game, like you mentioned. Mm-hmm. I mean, you got teams that have all kinds of freaking weapons, and one, God forbid, one team gets up 14-0. I mean, that game goes ballistic.
Yeah.
I mean, it goes completely ballistic. Like San Francisco comes out and like does something in the first possession, and then Tua throws a pick six, which certainly is like -110 to happen. Mm-hmm. Then if it's 14-0 San Francisco, then the slate is over, because then the game will end up like 35-24, something like that, and all those guys are going to score, and all the run backs of actual guys that can play, right? Like you said, actual skill position guys. And listen, because I'm not getting to much of it, that means that most people are not, which means that it's gonna be low owned, and I think that's a tremendous way to play, actually.
Yep. Miami, San Francisco, man, I'm telling you, Millie Maker winner tomorrow. Let's see, what's my handle on DK? It's multicam, as it is most places. No salary cap, 3 guards, 3 forwards, 1 center. What's your lineup? I have no fucking clue, man. I'm talking NFL. But if you would like info on that, you can go over to paydrdfs.com, check out the models. And obviously, if I'm in the Discord and I'm just like hanging out, then I'm happy to talk about that stuff. But Giannis is out, so I'm rerunning the models right now. You need to make sure that you pay attention to that.
What NBA he's talking about?
Yeah, I'm talking about NBA for a second.
I'm literally trying. Jalen Suggs is out, so I'm literally trying to run everything and get everything in like 7 minutes. No problem. Be all good.
I hate NBA. I had to just rerun NBA while I'm doing this.
It's the worst.
Yeah, I think that Miami San Francisco game, and if we're just looking at spreads, right? Miami San Francisco is right here. It's 2-point spread. Again that Minnesota game, that Minnesota and Seattle spot, like that's a 4-point spread. But I think that that's another one of those games that if you think one team is going to get out to another lead, like if Seattle gets out to a lead, then we have Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison on the other side with Sam Darnold, who's been playing like an MVP, right? And if Minnesota gets out to a front, Seattle has been the highest dropback over expectation team in the league this year. So they're going to pass a bunch. I think that's another game that is not getting near enough attention. DK Metcalf at like no ownership seems like an incredible play overall, just because people are ignoring him. So I think that those Miami, San Francisco, and Minnesota, Seattle are probably my favorite spots to stack by far. And as it comes down to, usually we talk a lot about ownership and we talk a lot about leverage. I think we nailed a lot of that on this pod. Mm-hmm. But Jahmyr Gibbs, I think you either have Jahmyr Gibbs or you have a Detroit stack. I think that it makes a lot of sense to go Jahmyr Gibbs and play it in relation to a Caleb Williams, Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, some sort of stack Chicago. I think that makes a lot of sense. If Detroit gets out to a lead, their defense is just decimated. Chicago is going to be able to pick and play. I think that the only real piece of chalk that we didn't really talk about here was Anthony Richardson.
Oh.
We didn't mention him much, but he does project for 16% owned. Were you getting any when you were running?
0.
Wow.
Right.
Might come in way low.
I mean, I got 0 right now. I mean, I guess, and that's why I kind of like running stuff and stuff. I don't really have to say, well, why don't you have him? I don't know.
Right.
I just don't. You want to know why? Because I got more of other guys. So I had, for example, 26% Caleb Williams, 17% Burrow, 10% Kyler Murray, 7% Geno Smith, 7% Bryce Young. I'm just not. Oh, there it is. I'm getting out of 150 lineups so far that I've created. I'm getting 2 with Anthony Richardson. So I've got him.
Yeah, you got a little bit.
I got him.
He's I think you're probably getting less because he is projecting for higher ownership.
Okay.
Probably going to cut out there. And he's kind of hard. That game environment kind of sucks, right? I was talking a bunch of shit about Tennessee. The thing with him, though, is he's one of those – he's the exact same play as Michael Penix Jr., where you're just playing him because he's cheap. It's that the other side of the game sucks. You're playing him hoping that he nukes and hopefully brings somebody with him. He has had a decent relationship with Josh Downs. When you run the contest sims over here at Pater, you get a lot of Josh Downs. Josh Downs shows up as optimal 25% of the time. Very, very high. And that's because Anthony Richardson shows up 26% of the time as the highest scoring quarterback. So,
wow.
Josh Downs and Anthony Richardson stacks, I think, are the only thing that I didn't talk about that contest sims really, really like. And I think that it makes a lot of sense, especially with Josh Downs only at 4,900. So, similar to that Miami-San Francisco spot, I think that this is a spot where people are not going to be high enough on it as according to the contest sims. It's a spot that I really like. And if I do end up saying fuck it and playing tomorrow, I'd be hard pressed not to play an Indianapolis QB +1 with Richardson and Downs. But I wouldn't feel, similar to the conversation that we said earlier, I wouldn't feel that it was necessary to bring it back with a Westbrook Akine or a Calvin Ridley or anything like that. I just don't give a shit about the Tennessee side. I don't trust it. So, that's my only thing on Indianapolis.
Who with Mason Rudolph for Tennessee, right?
Yeah, and I don't want to be attached to fucking Mason Rudolph. I just don't.
I mean, if you're gonna play bad teams, I think we should just rather play like Jacksonville and the Raiders. I think. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. You'd much rather just play Brian Thomas Jr. and Brenton Strange, who both project well and have been good and are stepping into roles where we have seen them be able to be valuable, right? Rather than trying to trust Tennessee with fucking Mason Rudolph. It's the same thing last week. People somehow talked themselves into 21% on Adam Thielen last week, which was batshit fucking insane because why would I tie myself to a 21% owned wide receiver tied to Bryce Young? I just don't understand that. And it's kind of the same thing this week. I don't want to tie myself to Will Levis. Granted, Tennessee's going to be way lower owned. So that's better.
But is it even Will Levis?
Oh, no. Mason Rudolph. Right.
Okay.
Mason Rudolph. But I don't want to be tied to Mason Rudolph or Will Levis, right? I don't want to be tied to shitty quarterbacks that I don't think represent upside for their wide receivers. So I don't know. I think that Indianapolis is an interesting QB +1, but I have no inclination to use any correlation as a bring back.
Now, one of the other things, by the way, which is a big edge in if you're going to stack, if you're going to focus on San Francisco, Miami, is that because it is a later game, you get a lot of flexibility. Like if you don't like what's going on, like earlier in the day, you have a little more flexibility to swap off of guys. Where if you commit a little bit too much early, and I fiddled around with this before about whether in all sports whether that flexibility is worth enough to actually up the projections of some of these later games. I decided not to, but I thought about it. But if listen, for me, it's like a break tie thing. Like if I were going to decide between stacking Detroit, Chicago, and stacking San Francisco, Miami, or whatever, and I couldn't decide, I would do the San Francisco one just because I reserve a little more flexibility to change stuff later.
Well, that late swap equity is really valuable. It is super, super valuable, but it depends on who you can swap to.
Right. But there's enough enough games where.
Yeah, there's enough. Right. But my point is you have to care about that. That's
Right.
the kicker is who are you really saving your late swap equity for? In NBA, late swap equity is fucking gold, right?
Oh, yeah.
You have no idea what value is going to open up later on because these motherfuckers never actually want to play this game. They just sit whenever they fucking want.
Right.
But like in NFL, you have much less chances to do late swap equity. And one thing that I think about, one thing that I actively try to do is play the more expensive of two wide receivers on a team in a late swap game so that I have the opportunity of swapping down to the other one as a just in case. Especially if they're going to be popular, if I have George Kittle in the flex and Juwan Jennings as a swap, and George Kittle is going to be 30% owned in some scenario, and I can swap to Juwan Jennings at 15% owned. That's a really highly equitable swap that I can make if I need it.
Yep.
But it all depends on what you can swap to. I don't look at Miami, San Francisco like that. There are later games, but based on the pricing involved, I don't think that I would feel like I would have much equity, especially because I don't think it's going to be highly enough owned. Like if Miami, San Francisco is really highly owned, then yeah, I would plan to swap off of them if I was doing badly. But if they're going to be low owned, I'm just kind of like, if I get to the late games and they're low owned, I'm fucked one way or another. I'm just playing for upside. So
is there any questionables that are worth mentioning?
I
didn't think there were.
I don't think there are.
Okay.
The inactives have been pretty much taken care of today.
Okay.
So, you got any closing thoughts here, man?
No, it's cool. I mean, again, this is for some people they've been sweating over this most of the week. For me, I look one time Monday, especially because there are like a lot of split slates this week. I get a little bit lazy with the Sunday slate. I don't really look until right around this time. Mm-hmm. But as far as first look, I'm kind of down with a couple of things already. I'm kind of down with that Chicago, Detroit. I'm kind of down with that San Francisco, Miami. And I might force them in, and I don't do that too often. I usually just rely on my numbers, rely on the Sims, and just freaking just go with it. But as I like to say, this is, I don't have to. This is the United States of America after all, right? I mean, people died in many wars so that I could jam in low projected guys if I feel like it. So I just might do it.
I gave my closing thoughts. I think Miami, San Francisco, Minnesota, Seattle, those are the nuts game environments. I'd like to have a lot of effort to that. And then Detroit, Chicago, I think is a really, really good spot as well. And I think you can overstack the shit out of that game if you want to. You can go 5-man up on that. I think you can go 5-man up on the Minnesota, Seattle game as well if you want to. So those are my two big ones. If you've enjoyed this, then thanks for tuning in. My name's James Cool, and I've been joined by Eric Haber, Sheets. This has been put on by PayDirtDFS.com. If you don't have a subscription over at PayDirt, you should go get a subscription. Really nice price point for a lot of the really strong models. And every sport is covered except for like MMA and NASCAR. I don't have either one of those, and I probably should. But thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you have any questions, reach out to me in the Discord or over on Twitter. And if you don't have questions and you just plan on following the advice, that's great. If you think that this was awful, then that's great too. And, you can have bad opinions. So I'm not going to fight you on it. But I hope that one of us gets a trophy tomorrow. And I'm going to go try to figure out the rest of this fucking Rubik's Cube. All right.
Enjoy.
See you later, dude.